With the Wanted engine, Bonfire, SP, and a ton of other insanely expensive cards, it can feel highly discouraging to compete in Yu-Gi-Oh! Without selling a kidney. However, right under the surface, there are plenty of powerful decks that can be bought for incredibly cheap right now. Some of these decks have tops at YCSs or are positioned to specifically counter some of the most problematic cards in the format. So here are 5 budget decks you can play in this Tier 0 hell. To start, Fluandereeze has been the go-to for budget decks for like the last year or so. Pretty much once Advent of Adventure got reprinted, the deck has been literal pennies, and the newly printed Swallow's Cowrie is basically Advent 2. Flu is a pretty straightforward control strategy. You use the field spell or Rabina to search your entire archetype to end on M-Pen, who stops all effects of attack position monsters. This kind of screws over link spam decks like Snake Eyes, disabling them from using a majority of their extra deck. In fact, right now I do feel like Flu is in an especially powerful position in the meta. Because it doesn't care about special summons or the extra deck at all, you get to really abuse a ton of cards most decks can't. You can Prosperity for 6 multiple times in one game if needed. You get to run 3 Shifter, which can solo win a game against Tearlaments, Horus, Fire Kings, and a ton of other decks. Every top tier deck runs some form of graveyard setup right now, and denying that from your opponent can decide the game almost immediately. You can also search DD Crow consistently for single targeting Garunix or Flame Princess. Dodging targeted interaction with Advent and Swallow is also very helpful, so for my number 1 pick right now, Flu cannot be beat. Though Droll and Lockbird is kind of game ending for you. I guess these birds are not of the same feather. My second pick for this format is Virtual World. If you don't know, Virtual World a few years back was all about turboing True King of all calamities, one of my favorite artworks on a card, and a gigantic floodgate on legs. The only thing more disappointing than this realization was Cross Duel. Jesus could not save this one. But Calamities plus their continuous trap was a top tier board with very little counterplay. Anyway, that guy is banned, so I'm happy to say Virtual World's new game plan is another floodgate. God damn it. You pretty much spam level 6s to make Beatrice, which lets you send Transaction Rollback to the graveyard. Transaction Rollback allows you to copy an effect of another trap card, so on your opponent's turn you send Ghost Meets Girl or Mayakashi's Tale to lock out your opponent from special summoning. Sorry Chad, this is real life, the ghost gets the girl. It's not the most exciting game plan in the world, but it is incredibly effective. Virtual World can make this end board with insane consistency, and even can play through a hand trap or two. Now, Transaction Rollback is like $40, it's not really budget, but the rest of the deck is literal pennies, so as a whole it's pretty affordable for what I see as a solid tier 2 deck. You can also run the Adventure engine to insulate your combo or set up some field presence when this inevitably happens to you for your bad karma. Shen-Shen's macro effect is super relevant right now. Even if your opponent stops the Beatrice, they still might not be able to play through Shen-Shen. And having a searchable trap that can pop a card every turn is really helpful in a pinch. It also recycles resources and gives you an infinite grind game. So Virtual World is probably the most underrated pick right now for the meta, and thank God there's no other giant floodgate monsters named Calamity. Like, what would be the odds? Oh, and if you're enjoying the video so far, a like and subscribe would go a long way to support the channel. I'm asking now because I promise you, the jokes will get even worse. Okay, I was pretty sure after the banning of Arise Heart this would seal the deal for the deck, but somehow Kashtira returned. This is the first deck I've ever seen top major events even after their boss monster gets banned, but with what they have left, it makes sense. The main deck cards still have some incredible effects. Ripping a card out of the extra deck with Unicorn is one of the most powerful actions you can do in the game. It helps that people usually run 1 SP, mostly because they want to afford rent this month, but also because they weren't expecting Kashtira to be a super dominant force. This deck also gets to use Prosperity and Shifter, which as mentioned before can completely destroy a deck's game plan, like Snake Eyes or Tearlaments. And stealing opponents' monsters consistently with the Big Eye is nice, and Dracosack is still quite relevant after almost a decade. One of the techs I haven't seen until recently is to make number 76 to sort of steal opponents' monsters from the graveyard and attach them to your monster, as Graveyard Hate is at an all-time high right now. And the deck pretty much just relies on outgrinding your opponent, and consistently reviving your field with Birth and Preparations. This deck is probably the most expensive of the budget decks, but is also maybe the best positioned for the upcoming events, not losing to Graveyard Hate or Droll at all. To take Graveyard Hate to the max though, Exosister is the deck for you. Not only can you play the previous floodgates mentioned before, but the monsters themselves can prevent your opponent from utilizing their graveyard without letting you gain a ton of advantage. Most of the cards hover for less than $1, besides the boss monster at a staggering $15. Most of the time you'll end on Michaelis, and as soon as your opponent even thinks about using their graveyard, you send a 40 petabyte zip bomb straight to their Neuralink. You can also run some of the spirits like Sakitama and Aratama to make a rank 4 before going into Martha to try to bait out some negates or drop a drunk taper on the board for safety. Or an EP tired little man if you live in a freedom country. And of course, being a rank 4 deck gives you access to Dweller, Exciton, and Exciton's cooler brother. These nuns will have you praying to I'm not doing this stupid ass joke next deck. Ugh. But before I do, here are some honorable mention decks. Decks that are good, but for one reason or another, I thought they wouldn't make the cut. Labyrinth is pretty cheap, as no card exceeds $20 and most are less than $1. However, there is one big issue. Chaos Angel is kind of needed for the deck. It's really damn good, and the card is $80. You need 2 to 3 of them. If you don't care to run them though, it's a very good pick, and it's the only good trap deck right now. Sword Soul is an amazing value and easy to pick up, but turn 1 board, it's kind of weak. Most decks can play right through it. Still, not a bad choice. It's a personal favorite deck of mine. I would avoid Branded, as the Bestial cards are terrible in a fire format, and Quem is still a lot of money. And finally, Raid Raptors are cheap and powerful, but lose to Droll and are quite difficult to play. Might not be worth the time to big brain the lines compared to something easier and just as effective. Now, you might remember Mikanko as the deck that can occasionally instantly win against you in Master Duel, causing many a player to go cry on Reddit about it. But in the TCG, it's doing something even more unfair. Ken and Gen have given this deck an amazing game plan going first. Not only do they cycle out a card from the opponent's hand, but lead into rank 3 plays, specifically Acid Golem. You give this guy to your opponent using Geonator Transverser, and now they are unable to special summon while this card is face up on the field. Man, it sure is neat how like half the budget decks I mentioned today end on Floodgates. The Yugi Boomers in my comments are gonna have a field day with this one. But this deck is definitely budget, as the most expensive engine card is a solid $8. The Acid Golem combo on the draw is incredibly powerful, pretty much forcing your opponent to open Econ, Droplet, or die. And as usual, if your opponent goes first, you can run a handful of board breakers to set up easy OTKs with their main deck and ritual monsters. They also have targeting and destruction protection, so they can be a pain to remove off the field. The moral of the story is, always believe in the bond of 2 men. Also, thank you for 2K subs. It's been growing so fast, and now big names are reacting and responding. It's all so much. Now, obviously, I'm still just some random nobody. I'm not gonna go down the street and hear people chanting my name like, "Bread, bread, 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 bread." But thank you. It means so much. I hope you found a deck that interests you. Don't let all the expense distract you from all the amazing budget decks available right now. This is BreadBoyWeeb, signing out.